Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Tony, for putting together a brilliant evening. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I can only see you behind the sort of hazy yellow blur that's in my face. But I'm going to give a little talk about open data. We've got a space station at Goonhilly. I've got a pocket rocket for Cornwall, which I think is open data and the potential that it can create. As Gary said, my day job is Visual Business, but I'm the lead for the Open Data Institute for Cornwall, and this is going to just describe a little bit about what we do. Who here knows what open data is? You raise your hands. Okay, about 25%. All right, so by the end of this you will know, if I can get the clicker to work. Am I supposed to point it in a particular direction? Or should I do it this way? Yeah. I'll do it that way. Okay, I'll do it that way. All right, well, after this you are going to know what is open data. I'm going to talk about how open data works and how we can use open data, because I think Cornwall is the kind of area that's got fantastic potential, so sociologically, economically, it can be helped massively by having an open data strategy. So what is open data? Well, basically, open data is any data that anyone can access, use, and share, which sounds like a really easy thing, but the reality is that a lot of data can't be accessed, it can't be used, and it can't be shared. So there is a sort of whole class of data which we call open data, which is those things that every other type of data is not. And if you would like to find out more about what open data is, there's a couple of links. In fact, this talk is peppered with links, but there's a link there to the What is Data video that the ODI has put together, and a fabulous talk that happened a few weeks ago about the future of open data by Professor Sir Nigel Shadbolt, which I thoroughly recommend. It's a riveting watch. Open data is not this. It is not a PDF. And a lot of people, companies that I speak to and that the ODI speaks to will say, well, we do open data. We put PDFs on our website. People can look at that data in a PDF. But you can't wrangle it. You can't sort it. You can't do anything with it. So if anyone sort of says they think that open data is a PDF, please correct them, because we have more to go with data than a PDF could ever provide. And the key thing about open data is that it is the raw ingredient of the web as it was designed to be. If we kind of go back to the beginning, Tim Berners-Lee, who started the idea of the Open Data Institute, when he created hyperlinking and this idea of a World Wide Web, and when he talked about it at the Olympics, he said this is for everyone. The idea is that you can connect information together and you can start to create repositories of knowledge which were hitherto unknown before by mankind. And this picture below, John Perry Barlow. Does anyone know John Perry Barlow? You're familiar with the work that he did. He very sadly passed away recently, but he wrote a manifesto for the independence of cyberspace in the very early days of the web, talking again about how this was a new frontier and that the openness of the web and the ability to share information would create a fabulous new age, which sounds very idealistic when you think about where we are today and some of the conversations that we've had. But the intention with the web and the conceived power and potency of the web was all about the openness of the data. It was a web of information able to connect separate sources of content to one another, creating new possibilities and a new operating environment, and very different, importantly, from the linear conveyor belt management of the factory era. And so what's important about open data is that it creates compound value. When you link things together, you get new insights. When you connect one source of information to another source of information, you get a crossroads, which is a place which wouldn't exist in a kind of very linear Gantt chart type of way of running a project, for example. So there are endless possibilities, endless areas of innovation that open data makes possible. And this is not just, the view of some people who are data geeks like myself or the ODI. There's been some very interesting work that's been done by the MIT, talking about the mathematical models of innovation. How does innovation happen? And it comes from this thing that they're calling the adjacent possible, by linking things together that are around the periphery of an entity or an idea. you get a much richer, much better, much more fertile source for innovation. And open data does that, and we're finding examples where it does do that. So the Open Data Institute, as I said, it was started by Sir Tim Berners-Lee and Professor Sir Nigel Shadbolt. It's here to really keep people, make them aware that these are essential principles that the web was originally conceived as having. And the ODI works as a head office in London. We do a lot of work in policy areas with government, with the Cabinet Office, with key government departments, also spearhead things like open data at the G8. And it's represented by a series of nodes across the UK and the world. Those nodes are different in nature. The people involved with them have different technical backgrounds as well. The Cornwall node is a community node. So the idea of being here today is to really talk about us as a community and to find and meet people who are interested in furthering the open data agenda. It's a voluntary role, so I do it alongside Vissel Business, but the value of the ODI is that we work on Slack and we work connected around the world with other nodes as well. We have a large body of members. You can join the ODI for the princely sum of £1, if you follow that link, for example. So what we're doing by sharing knowledge about best practice is we're able to build a really strong idea of the best ways forward to open up data and some of the technical challenges that come around changing culture, for example, so that it's more open by design. What is open data? Well, any kind of data can be open. So numerical data, GIS data, web data, qualitative data. And when it is, you can do things with it which are very interesting. If you think about sort of making recipes, this is very similar, but it's with data. So you can interrogate the data, you can sort it in different ways if it's in a format which is manipulatable. You can link data, so you can take one data set and you can link it to another, and you can start to create very interesting insights from putting two pieces of data together. You can map it. So you can take data which is tabular and you can start to put it into a geographic space. You can visualize data, and there's some very nice examples of visualized data which are coming through now. Excuse me. And you can find hidden patterns within the data. And I don't know if you've heard of the phrase exceptional reporting, but what's happening in management terms now is that data's eliminating a lot of the day-to-day grunt work, so that we're only really having to look at the exceptions, and that makes an organisation a lot more efficient, rather than sort of trawling through and saying, yes, everything's like this, and this is the same as it was before, and everything else. Data surfaces the areas which are outside of the norm, and that in itself creates a very useful set of perspectives. So good open data can be linked to, and it can be easily shared and talked about. It can be very easily processed. It's available in a standard structured format. The base structured format is a CSV file, because with that you can put it into any kind of software programming and you pretty much know what you're going to get. It can be relied upon, so it has a guaranteed availability and consistency over time. This is different from a piece of data which is around for a couple of months and then it's kind of not anymore. It needs to have some provenance to it. It needs to have some source places where it lives that you can kind of go back to and check the veracity of the data. And it's traceable, so you can find out where it actually came from, which is obviously a big hot issue in the web at the moment, so others can work out whether or not to trust it. And what we do at the ODI is we think about a lot of the fundamentals of creating good data, so data elements, and this includes things like data infrastructure. So you may or may not be aware that there is a lot of work underway in various places to create a national data infrastructure. So an infrastructure for housing, for example, or an infrastructure for energy, which starts to look at the key asset elements of the data in that space, the standards, the technologies which are powering the use of that data, and where you have a lot of data sets that are released, registers which allow an easy way to navigate one's way through data, where important data is held and what kind of data it is. And then there's the kind of language, so there's a protocol which, you know, if you look at local government, for example, they're all doing the same thing, but there's been a lot of differences in terms of terminologies and the way that data is expressed. And then the last year or so, there's been a lot of work to be able to start to create standardization of that, so that we can use the same identifiers consistently, and from that start to get some really powerful insights nationally and internationally to create network effects. And then there are standards, so agreed units of measurement, weights, times of data captured, data formats. If you're interested in any of that stuff, if you want to geek out on that stuff, then I suggest you visit data.gov.uk as a starting point. And what we've also been working on is this whole idea of objections to why data is open or not open, and also putting open data into context. So we talk a lot about the open data spectrum. Not all data needs to be open. And I think that's a fear sometimes when decision makers hear the phrase open data, they worry that suddenly, you know, all the company secrets are going to be leaked, or there's going to be some sort of kickback because data has just been willy-nilly cast into the public sphere. Open data is very much part of the spectrum. So there is some data that does need to be closed, you know, whether that's personal information or company information which needs to be confidential for the sake of competitiveness. Some data that can be shared, and that can be shared under a license, so that there's a clear sense of governance around how the open data is shared. And then other data which is open, and various levels of data. So there might be macro data, or it might be day-to-day, quite specific data. So what we do at the Open Data Institute is think about the usage of data and think about the kind of licensing which is appropriate before any data set is released as open data. And that's important because when we've got open data, and what we're seeing increasingly is that open data is creating new kinds of business models, and I'll show you some examples in a minute about that. The innovation that comes from open data is really powerful. It flies in the face of traditional business modelling. It's not what people are used to. You know, opening up data to create competitive advantage is kind of a bit of a paradox to some people. But what it does do, it is allows people who aren't even necessarily, you know, coming to a subject with the same presumptions or sacred cows. They might access data and come to it with fresh eyes and see things that the people that use the data most often don't see or don't look for. And they can explore that data, and they can link data sets together that wouldn't be linked together otherwise. And there's a lot that happens in terms of hackathons and data challenges, which works on exactly that basis. Open data has to have a license, as I said a little bit earlier, that says that it is open data, because without that license, the data can't legally really be reused. In the initial days of the open data movement, which really started in earnest in about 2010, we had the London Data Store at Transport for London. It was a bit of a Wild West, you know, there's a lot of data scraping, and you can scrape data, and a lot of people do scrape data. But to be able to build a case for open data, there's standards of open data, as I said, data hygiene, and licensing, which means that it's gone through some sort of opinion-forming verification, and the license says, yes, you can use it and reuse it, and it does conform to good standards of quality data. And that's a process which needs to be governed, and that's really what the ODI has spent a lot of time on establishing. So how can we use open data in Cornwall? Well, I mean, there's a lot of different areas. These are some of the global sustainable development goals, which have been set by the United Nations. And a lot of the things on that list there are obviously things which are incredibly relevant to Cornwall. Now, it kind of goes without saying that Cornwall Council is a very strong, potent force when it comes to the management of these municipal areas. So my personal sort of preoccupation has been building up good relationships with Cornwall Council so that we can change the posture that exists towards open data, make open data much more of the norm. And I can't say anything too much about that at the moment, but there have been significant conversations, so we can start to think about data in all of these areas, creating much more of an impact, I think. But there's a lot to do, and if we use open data to start to look at areas where we can make the best improvements and that we can create the biggest gains most quickly, there could be some really fantastic results, I think, in terms of the potential for open data for Cornwall. Meanwhile, over the Tamar, there are places close to us that are already doing some really brilliant things. And I'm going to, I can't speak for those, but I think the fourth most handsome person in Plymouth is probably more than a little involved with these things. So Gary, I mean, you know about these.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that we've got those two, good idea. Yeah, we've got those two organisations there, Data Plymouth and Data Play. They put on events kind of quite regularly around open data, so looking at particular challenges when it comes to social, housing, entertainment, environment, all of that kind of stuff. And not only is it really good, it's actually led by the local council, which is even more shocking. There's loads of really good stuff. They've got big, vast amounts of open data that you can go in and look at and use for different projects. In the past, they've actually put on the actual workshop days where you can get an award and grants and of up to £2,000 each time when you award you win a different project and you go on to develop that project. And there's been lots of other information stuff has come from there. I won one for what did I do? I forgot what it was. I did it so long ago, but it was all open data based. That's what it was. It was for neighbourhood plans. So when local support groups and local networks are putting together, where all the local pubs are, where all the local schools are, to put together some kind of neighbourhood plan for to submit to their local governments. It was just basically a little database, so that instead of the traditional way that these groups of largely retired people would go out and find out where all the pubs were, find out where all the schools are, they could just go to an online website and do a search on their postcode and what they're looking for, and it tells them where they all are, and they can create reports based off of that. Some people did stuff on environmental sensors, so they'd walk around and see what the air quality and things like that were when they're outside and when they're in an office environment. That's just two of the examples. There were loads more stuff, and it's really, really good. I'm not sure when the next one is, but have a search online for Data Play and Data Plymouth, and there'll be more details about it.
Thank you very much. So there's been about seven so far, hasn't there? And I mean, it just shows what can be done when you've got the support of a council behind you, and also the level of interest that exists locally to be able to use the data that is available and to start to see what can be done with it. I mean, data wrangling, I personally find it huge fun. And things like the Open Libraries project is an example where those sorts of pieces of information, browser behaviour and everything, it can create much better services, much more sustainable services. We don't need to deal with cuts if we can kind of find smart ways to be able to sustain the services that people want using open data and to understand what those services are. So, for example, there are public library sets in England everywhere, including Cornwall, that are available on the websites there. You can see the link to the gov.uk link. All sorts of data available on data.gov. There are 158 results at the moment for Cornwall, which is not a massive amount, but there's things that we could do with that data, and we could start to really build. What I want to do is to meet people and talk to people who are interested in thinking about what open data can do for Cornwall, so we can work on these things together and start to make a difference. There are some great examples, which I'm just going to show you very quickly to wrap up. This beautiful piece of CSV genius is a little piece of the deprivation and well-being data that exists on data.gov.uk, and a brilliant guy called Jamie White in Manchester has taken that data and he's linked it to political election results data to be able to create this deprivation versus political control in English local authorities map. Available as a download, actually, if you follow the links. And what this shows is that the lava lamp graphics, as he's describing them, the ones that are most narrow at the top have the least area of deprivation, and the ones which are fattest at the bottom have the most. And there is a really clear correlation between how deprivation is developed in areas, some areas and not in others, according to the kind of political stance within the councils. This one is Transport for London, and I mentioned they were very early onto the open data scene. They've opened up their data sets for a long time. I think they've got about 600 apps linking to their open data at the moment. And a research piece by Deloitte done last year, back end of last year, says that that has generated annual economic benefits of savings of up to £130 million a year in London. Not in the necessarily obvious ways around, being able to create revenue by selling data. A lot of people will automatically think, oh, we've got data, let's sell the data. But it's created a lot of benefits in terms of times, cost, pinpointing areas that need repairs based on traffic most easily, creating opportunities for new services through things like City Mapper and other apps, and being able to just manage resources much, much better. This is Yorkshire Water, which have teamed up with ODI Leeds because they recognise that having open data as a core part of their information structure means that they can get customers reporting leaks and publishing that data, so they can start to see the health of their water systems, for example. They can start to pinpoint critical areas around pollution. So there's a lot of commercial organisations now, Thomson Reuters is another one, Arup is another one, that are getting involved with the ODI to be able to see, well, what can data do to us as part of our data spectrum? And we're very excited about the kinds of things which are happening in that area. And this is one that I've personally been involved with. The Food Standards Agency is part of DEFRA. DEFRA have made a commitment to open up 90% of their data as open data. DEFRA have about 35 agencies within itself, and that is a huge commitment to open data. The Food Standards Agency has a huge workload in terms of food compliance and food safety, but they recognise that if they work with the suppliers from farm to fork on open data, they can just focus their resources on the things which are most in need of some sort of support. So, for example, if Tesco's fridges and freezers have temperature sensors and that sensor data goes to the Food Standards Agency, only the fridge freezers in the shops which sort of fall outside the safety parameters need to be something that anybody looks at. That sort of crushes the workload by a margin of about 90%. They've also been able to link food hygiene data with business rates paid in, say, Northern Ireland and save the council about £400 million. So we're creating an ecosystem here of open data with all of the providers, from the food growers to the supermarkets to the transport providers, so that open data becomes the default, and food management as a result has got a lot more public scrutiny and transparency, and it's a really brilliant example of how open data can be used for the common good. So I've showed you some of the creative exercises and the things that we can do with data. There's a good talk here in terms of using open data as a creative material. And I was chatting to a couple of guys in the break about the sort of creative angle of visualizing and using open data in terms of interaction. For anyone that's interested, there are some brilliant lectures on Fridays at 1 p.m. called ODI Fridays. If you look for the hashtag ODI Fridays, and if you go to the YouTube channel, you'll be able to find a massive amount of information that's being curated on there in terms of open data. And apart from all of those great things in terms of the data, why does this matter? Well, because democracy, I mean, we've had Facebook, as we were talking about earlier, Facebook questioning the safety and the privacy of data and how it's used, and we're getting this conscious reckoning now about what is happening with our data. If we are interested in protecting ourselves and we're looking at technology for the common good, then open data kind of follows as a natural consequence of having that sort of a point of view. So if you are interested in thinking about how people in general can learn from data about what is going on in the world, please support the open data movement, join the ODI, come and have a chat with me, and let's talk about what we can all do together in Cornwall using open data as our fuel. So that's it from me. I hope it's been a useful talk. Thanks very much. Have we got time for a question or two, if anyone's got a question or two? And in the meantime, have a look at those links and join the ODI as a member. You'll get a lot more information from them on a weekly basis.